Let's see. I'll give it another few seconds, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Or I'll actually do introductions. So thank you all for coming. You are in the right place if you are here for the Ask the Expert Adventures in Innovation seminar series that is hosted in a collaboration with the CCTSI at the CU Anschutz Medical Campus, with CSU Ventures, the Tech Transfer Office for Colorado State University, and Venture Partners, the Tech Transfer Office for CU Boulder Campus. And we are so excited to have you here today and have you with us for our interview with the lovely Dr. Baker, who you should hopefully all be able to see. And if not, she will start talking in a moment and you will definitely be able to see her. So just so that you know, my name is Sarah Hibship. I am the Managing Director for Communications for the Colorado State University Research Foundation, and I will be interviewing Dr. Baker today. And just to give you all a brief background, but I will let Shenda do the majority of introducing herself, but to make sure that we all start on the same page. Dr. Baker was a professor of chemistry at Harvey Mudd College from 1991 to 2014, with a research focus on polymer nanostructures and self-assembly at liquid and solid interfaces. She is now the co-founder, president, and CEO of Synegen, and hopefully I said that correctly, Synegen, and also the CEO of Synspira, which is a spin-out from Synegen. So we are very excited to have her here, and I will let her go ahead and sort of finish the story of how she started and how she came to be where she is today. So Shenda, go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks to all of you who are listening now, and potentially people who do this non-real time. But when Sarah and I were chatting, one of the things that she mentioned you all might be interested in is how did I get from the academic space into the entrepreneur space? Because I have been a professor for many, many years, and then the decisions that I had to make in order to give up tenure and go into this very interesting industrial job. So I thought I'd maybe just quickly just sort of highlight what I've done, and then Sarah can poke at things that may be more interesting, or you all listening can shoot in questions if you like. But I'm an Albuquerque, New Mexico girl, and was always interested in really understanding how things work. I wanted to be a vet. I don't know if you guys knew that I wanted to go to Fort Collins and go to vet school. And I wanted to do that until I realized that veterinarians only see the sick animals, primarily see the sick animals. Went off to college thinking I was going to be a mathematician because math was very pure. And at that time I was such an idealist. I wanted to have a pure understanding, and math was sort of the purest thing. And when I was an undergraduate at Grinnell College, I got beyond sort of calculus into combinatorics and more less applied math. And I said, I can't get a hold of this. This does not work for my brain. And I always had an interest in sort of the chemistry side of things, and then absolutely fell in love with chemistry. I had a fantastic physical chemistry professor in Luther Erickson at Grinnell, and Jim Schwartz, who really encouraged me to think about the next steps. And I still had this love of finding ways to cure things, cure animals. Okay, I can do people. So I actually applied to MD PhD programs, and then on a whim applied to Caltech. And fortunately for me, got into all of these places and went and interviewed with the MDs at the MD PhD programs and found that their way of thinking was not the way that I thought. And fortunately, went to Caltech, which was a fantastic place. It was fantastic for a number of reasons. One was that as a chemist, I applied in the biology department because I really wanted to apply my chemical skills to solving biological problems. And then I got into doing biological problems and realized they're just too dang hard. In the sense that my brain likes to have a very clear understanding of each of the molecular interactions. And so I was very fortunate enough to transfer from biology department into chemistry and work with John Ballishweiler, which is where I met your very good Ray Goodrich, who was already in his group at the time. I was still going to stay with sort of biologically related things. So we were looking at encapsulating interferons into liposomes. So that'll date me right there, how long ago we were trying to do that kind of interferon drug delivery. So it was really cool because we were encapsulating interferons and putting them in the brains of dogs who were models for brain cancer, seeing if we could, once they take the tumor out, can the interferons help reduce the inflammation and manage the response there. And as I got into this research, my brain said, no, you can put this in, but you don't really know on a molecular level what's happening. Like maybe it worked because we did that. Maybe the dog was going to recover anyway. So again, very fortunate to be at Caltech because John Baldwin, who is a very creative man and just likes good, clever ideas, had everything from biology to scanning tunneling microscopy. And I ultimately got my thesis in looking at silicon 111 7x7 reconstructions in ultra high vacuum scanning tunneling microscope. I really went to the physics side and got my degree there. Two-body problem, trying to figure out where to go for my postdoc. And just a quick story here. It was nice to go back to Los Alamos because that New Mexico is home. And that was one of my offers. And so I called up Greg Smith, who was ultimately my mentor there, and said, we're thinking of having children on my interview. And he said, oh, what a great place to have kids, and went on for 15 minutes of why Los Alamos was the best place to have kids. So we had my first child in Los Alamos. And then position opened up at Harvey Mudd College, which, as you know, positions in specific areas don't open up very often. And I'd had a relationship with Harvey Mudd before and got the job there. And that was terrific. Moving on, somewhere in about 2004, I met a gentleman, William Wiesman, who was the head of combat casualty care for the Army at Fort Detrick and had done a number of far forward products in the battlefield. And he said, I have a polymer problem. I said, well, I'm a polymer chemist. And that ultimately turned out to be the genesis of what is now Synergen. So synergy at the edge, Synergen is how you say that. But you're really close. That was my second sabbatical in 2007 when we were really finding some interesting properties of these polymers we were looking at. So they're glycopolymers that you find, they're ubiquitous, they're polyglucosamines, but they're not soluble at physiologic pH. So we did some modifications so we could make these ubiquitous polyglucosamine glycopolymers active and targeted to mucosal surfaces. And that's a whole other thing we can talk about. But after the sabbatical, of course, I have to go back. And I love teaching at Harvey Mudd College. The students are great, a very supportive community. But there was this other thing, which was this very interesting research, which was beginning to show how we might be able to modulate bacterial interactions with cell surfaces and inflammation without using systemic immunosuppressives. So I went to my dear dean, who was Bob Cave at the time, another wonderful Caltech grad and professor at Harvey Mudd College, and said, I think I need to take a leave of absence and just take another year and see if I can figure this out. He said, well, the way things work out at Harvey Mudd, if you were to take 3 years, then we can hire and replace people and you'll have a slot to come back to. And I said, okay. After those 3 years, things got so interesting at the company. I sat in my office and cried for 15 minutes and said goodbye to Harvey Mudd College. Lots of communication with my husband, and that's a topic that we can talk about at some point if you like. But ultimately, here we are at Synergen with products that are in the clinic in phase 2 clinical studies at the company Synspira, to whom we out-licensed the pulmonary assets. And we've got wound care and oral care medical devices that have been cleared. And now we're going into other spaces. So that's a long-winded 10-minute introduction, but it gives you plenty of things to poke on.
So thank you. I could have never done that justice. And I think where I would like to start is really this idea that in many ways you had a very traditional PhD to professorship, and you went in and you were at Harvey Mudd for gosh, 23 years. And so obviously a fully tenured position, full professor, and yet you had to figure out if you wanted to give that up and go into your company. And can you talk just a little bit about how you made that decision and why you picked one over the other?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I get that a lot. I will say there was many hours with my husband contemplating our future. Giving up tenure is a big deal. Not just job security, but I really enjoyed being a professor. I had visions of my grandchildren toddling down the halls of Harvey Mudd College, and that was, I'd be the old professor in my office there. But it's a culmination of a couple of things. One is that the faculty there are fantastic, and the students are fantastic. And while I love teaching students, there are people who are very capable of doing that in my absence, and they do. And so that was one thing I could justify was, if I'm gone, nobody's gonna suffer. In fact, they're gonna do just fine. The other thing is, it just got so interesting. The science that we were learning, this new class of glycopolymers just became so interesting that luckily my husband at the time had a tenured faculty position. And so from a personal risk, it wasn't quite as risky as some. And the opportunity to bring a whole new class of therapeutics to patients, it was just time. So it wasn't easy. As I said, the day I had to move out of my office and take out all of the theses of my students was not a happy day. But it's been certainly exciting every day since I've left.
So do you think we often, both at CU and at CSU, have faculty that start companies and try to do both, try to do a full-time tenured position and their research, which actually might be 1.5, if not 2.5 jobs in and of itself, and then also try to run a company. What have you learned? Because it took you a while to make that decision to do one or the other. So can you talk a little bit about the struggles of trying to balance that while you were doing both?
Yes, I was not effective at doing both. I think it's very difficult for anyone to be, very effective doing both, and unless you have people who are actively taking leadership roles in the company. I'm gonna say, if you're in the academic side, you just can't. The time it takes to build the people, the finances, the fundraising, the science, the patents, everything, the relationship building you need in a company. It was really all consuming, particularly in the early stages. And I didn't have someone. I had a mentor, Bill Wiesman, who was fantastic as a mentor, but he wasn't doing the sort of the day-to-day kinds of things. And so the years when I was on sabbatical, I guess leave of absence, I still had some research students, and that worked because I could pull them into what I was doing at Synogen. But I think we suffered a little bit in the early stages because I was pulled in so many directions. It was very difficult to make all things move forward and at the rate of speed that they needed to in order to really, propel us. So that's one of the things I would really recommend is that if you really want to get a company started, get someone who's going to throw themselves into it 150% of the time and let them do the busy work. It's not even the busy work, all of the development, thoughtful fundraising, partnership development. And if you're the idea person, bring the ideas. So that's one thing that I would recommend.
So just so everybody in the audience is there, I see that Kathy has sent a chat out to all of you. We do have a Q&A question and answer open. So if you have any questions for Shenda as we go along, please do not hesitate to put them into the Q&A box, and we will get them answered. And they can be related to the topic we're talking about, or just a question that something we've said has spurred and is a little bit off topic. No worries there. So thinking about that, you have been, you are the CEO of Synogen, and also for Sinspira. No, not anymore.
The CEO, but not anymore. When we spun out the company, I CEO'd that, but I was not CEO of Synogen at the time. Bill Wiesman was still CEO, so I could take that role until we hired a CEO, and we did hire really a first-rate guy, Bob Galato, who's running that company and has taken those products into phase 2 clinical studies.
So tell me a little bit, and also for the audience, how you had this research idea, and it was enough for you to found a company on, and sort of in those early years, and when you left Harvey Mudd, how you brought your expertise to bear in the company, and who you selected in sort of the business positions, how you filled those with experienced individuals that helped you move forward.
Yeah, so the early days, we were very fortunate that because our CEO, Bill Wiesman, was connected with the Army, we were very fortunate to have quite significant DoD funding. And so the early days, we weren't even doing a lot of business development. We were doing paid by the government to do fundamental research on how to control infection and inflammation in the far forward battlefield. And so then as we moved beyond that, hiring business people is, how do we find them? We did a lot of consultant work first. So we would go with outside groups that would help us do sort of investor relations or partnership relations. And there are a number of really well-positioned companies who can do that for you. They're not cheap, but they can help you do that. Our current business officer, Kaveri Parker, ran a company before, and although she's a super accomplished scientist in her own right, where she felt her strengths were translating that into the storytelling around how you raise money or tell a story around a product that you want to put out there for acquisition or for investment or for partnership. And it was through word of mouth and through going out and going to meetings and talking to people. I think for other positions, we put ads out in the in the Indeed and the marketplace, and I don't like it because you get 3 days or 3 interviews or whatever you get to try and figure out if this is a perfect fit for your company. And if you're a small company, that fit is so important. I found that connections, where you've got people who can recommend someone to you, who knows you and knows how your company works, that is so much more valuable and ultimately more successful than what we've done when we've done we did headhunter searches. It took us 2 years, much more valuable. And so building those relationships early on, and for me as a scientist, building relationships with business people was kind of weird, because that's not what I do. I am a kind of a crappy salesman, because I'm just trying to tell you the science. And if you don't believe the science, I'm like, okay, well, then you don't want my stuff. You don't understand the science. So having those business people, for me, incredibly important. That I just get too passionate about the science, and if you don't get it, I'm like, sorry. Sorry, turn that off. I meant to mute that.
So that brings me back to this idea of networking, and we've had other speakers that have talked at length in many ways that success is not necessarily in having a massive network or always trying to add people to your network, but it's building your network conscientiously and with people that there's benefit to both of you, and who you can learn from, and who can be mentors as well. And how would you categorize that throughout your your building of entrepreneurship and all that goes into that, how you have used some of I think what you would say is probably your fabulous mentors throughout your career, but then also found new ones, and maybe even bring that into internships or the concepts of how you still, from an industry perspective, might work with students or universities to assist on particular projects.
Yeah, you sort of hit it at two different levels. One is the students who I love bringing in. They always bring a fresh perspective. I had a wonderful conversation with Rick Smalley at one point, who said, I never put the really, really hard projects in the hands of a graduate student because they know it can't be done. I give it to the undergrads because they don't know it can't be done. And sometimes they find a way to, they find a way to solve the problem. So it's fun bringing in students, at all levels. And we have, because we're right across the street from Harvey Mudd College, we've had a number of students who did their thesis with us. Sometimes in main projects that were really important for us to move forward, and sometimes in sort of new ideas we wanted someone to play with. We've had students from University of Cincinnati, where Bill Wiesman went to his undergraduate. We've had students who just applied over the transom, and we've picked up. I will say it takes a lot of time from our personnel to have a student. And so for me, making that decision of whether we take students or not really involves a lot of discussion with the person who's going to be mentoring them, because it's usually not me. And we still have, we usually have to, we have to achieve on our goals, because we're a company. If we don't achieve, we don't make money. If we don't have money, everybody goes home and finds another job. So it's a very different balance than in an academic institution where your job is to train students. Our job is not to train students. Our job is to find solutions to problems that get us to a product or to an acquirable asset. And so it is a little bit of a balance, but I think on the whole, we get more ideas in by bringing in new people than sequestering ourselves in a small mindset. On the other side, you're absolutely right. It is targeting and finding those people who can help you do what you want to do. We don't do big pharma. So having a bunch of big pharma, BD people just doesn't make any sense for us. And so just through two things. One is making sure that the people who we bring into our fold kind of know who we are and what we do and are excited about it. If they're not excited about it, they're certainly not going to be very helpful. And then, from that, reaching out and finding their contacts and more contacts. So it is kind of a little, I wouldn't say it's a closed space, but you're right. There's only a certain number of hours in a day. And so you have to be selective for people, as you noted, who are mutually beneficial. They're going to get something out of it. We're going to get something out of it. And the whole enterprise moves forward faster and better because of it.
So I'm going to hit on one of the other questions we talked about last week in prepping for this, and this idea of really sort of the difference in how you run a company and how you come up with the problems that you're going to solve to take your product in a new direction or a different direction. What do you have to do to be a sustainable company versus how you think about or answer questions in academia, and what sort of that problem identification process looks like. And if you can just share a little bit about how that has morphed over the years as you've moved out of academia and into your companies, that would be great.
Yeah. So from the academic side, back in those days, not so long ago, the questions that we asked were really pushing forward our understanding of, for me, how polymers interact with each other and with the environment at interfaces. So any question that could help us understand those interactions more clearly, we could pursue. If I could write a proposal for it and get it funded, we could pursue it. And the endpoint was, of course, the science itself and presumably a publication. The other part of that, of course, was that a student could work on a project, a single project, pretty much as long as that project was moving forward. Coming over to academia, from academia into the industry side, all of the choices we make are around making the observations that we have chosen to follow, certain activity of a molecule to interact with a particular bacterium and control how it binds to surface epithelium, for example. Once we find that, the primary goal is reproducibility. Does that happen every time we do it? Under what conditions does it not happen? What are the tolerances under which it does and doesn't happen? And we don't really have the leisure, although we do need to go down mechanistically to understand why it's happening enough so that we can control its reproducibility. But for the most part, if we're going to take this product forward, the things that we focus on are, all right, make sure that we have the science right. We don't have the luxury of really just exploring all around that science. We have the imperative to make sure that what we're going to move forward into the clinic and into the human patient is reproducible. And we understand the tolerances and the environments in which it doesn't work, so that we are always providing something that's going to do what we tell people it's going to do once we get it into the patient. So it's a very different mindset, I think, that for me, going from, certainly we try, and depending on what literature you read, you'll say we are successful as academics or not at reproducibility. But it's certainly the imperative in business that the science you do is reproducible and under a variety of different conditions, and those conditions under which it's not reproducible. So that for me was a big change.
So how do you find, I'm thinking a little bit about customer discovery and sort of the research to market and the National I-Corps training programs where they're really pouring loads of funding into helping academics ask slightly different questions, and whether or not, if they do have an idea that has federal funding, that they validate the market a little bit and find out whether or not the customer really wants what their solution is, or what in fact the problems are. How do you, as a startup, approach figuring out what problems you're going to address or solve or explore for a new product offering? What does that look like?
Yeah, so as always, there's 2 or 3 things that go into the answer, right? I mean, the first thing we look at is what do our molecules do? What can we, on a biological, physiological, disease state things, what can our molecules do and what can they not do? And we really have to understand that. So that does actually suggest that we do have to know, the science of this pretty well. But that's the basis. We've really got to understand that. And then it's a number of things. It's you can look at what the NIH is saying is a big hole. You can read the literature. Like our first product is one that's in patients with cystic fibrosis. My sister is a clinical nurse specialist that has worked with cystic fibrosis patients for 30 years. And so I had a knowledge of that. And so sometimes it's just serendipity that the things that you're working on, you have a little bit more knowledge of. But I would say that there are some really fantastic products that do exactly what they're supposed to do that never see the light of day. And if you build it, they don't come necessarily. It's as much understanding the barriers to getting something to the market, even if there is a big hole, right? Oral mucositis. There are lots of products out there that are designed to treat oncology-related oral mucositis from chemotherapy or radiation therapy. But with dozens of products out there, there's still a big hole. But because there's so many out there, how do you make yourself have a position in that space? It's hard. And how do you get reimbursed? And how do you get the right set of people? So it turns out in oral mucositis, that would be maybe the nurse who is more important than the oncologist, because the oncologist, as we've learned, are not the ones who would be prescribing that. So it's really immersing yourself in the space that you think you're going to go, and trying to get out ahead of what you're doing rather than lagging behind. And I give you an example where we lag behind. We have a product that is approved for use and has great data, clinical data that we have published, but we have not really found our way to get into that market yet. So we were there before we had really done that work. So I'm not sure I answered it with a negative example, but
No, you did very, very clearly. The shift from a tech transfer perspective, and most of us who are on this call and the CCTSI is about translational research, and venture partners is as I mentioned, the tech transfer office for CU Boulder. From an academic perspective, and also when I was getting my PhD, you're looking at the literature and you're finding a hole in the literature and you're designing experiments to answer those holes if you can, or at least fill in the gaps in knowledge. In my training in tech transfer, as you said, right, you can build it and if nobody wants it, you can't do anything with it. And so figuring out whether or not somebody wants it or what capacity they want it in or how they want it, that customer discovery is pretty important to being able to translate your idea out of academia and into the real world, into actual use. You can always still get publications on it, but you can't, and sometimes you can get patents on it as well, but you can't do anything with it or get people to use it. And so you very much
it is literally the first slide in your slide deck
on how to what your customer wants.
Here is the marketplace. This is the hole. This is the big hole, and this is why no one else has filled it, and this is why you're going to fill it. And then you can tell them, what you're going to fill it with and why it's going to make them lots of money. But that is literally the first, okay, maybe the second slide, but it's way up there. And if you don't have that, you're not going to get funded.
So I'm just going to throw this back out to the audience. If anybody has questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A. You're making me do all the heavy lifting right now, and I do have a list of questions for Shenda, but I would love to answer if anybody has questions that are burning a hole in their mind. Please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. So also thinking about that, and as an industry partner potentially on research, and Harvey Mudd is very different. I will say is very different than CU or CSU and that sort of thing. How do you manage or think about as an industry partner your conflicts of interest when working with a university? Just a little bit. I'm curious.
Yeah. So I was in a very fortunate position at Harvey Mudd because Harvey Mudd's strategy is to, they don't take any IP. They don't have a tech transfer office. Their strategy is to find the best opportunities for their students to get cutting edge research experiences, whether because the clinic program, which you may or may not be familiar with, has students working with companies. And because Harvey Mudd doesn't take ownership of any of the IP that should arise from that, the companies are willing to put the students on their prize development projects rather than the ones that, hey, maybe it'll work or not. The strategy, of course, then is that, and if anything comes out of it, the companies will come back and donate to the college. I think that's been fairly successful thus far. We don't have to pay for a tech transfer office. But what that meant was any of those technologies that I had, and we had to be careful about Bayh-Dole. So all of you guys know about the Bayh-Dole funding and what's government will even require that the university therefore take a piece of it. But most of the work that we did early on, we did across the street in a company that we had put up as a sort of a interim when I was on my first sabbatical. So all of the technology that Synergen developed is owned entirely by Synergen, which is a very unique place, I think, for many small companies, when they're starting out from, you would say we were an academic spinoff, to own entirely and have control of our IP. And while I would really, really like to work with a number of academic institutions, the first thing I have to do is find out what their IP and tech transfer rules are, because my board has given me the charge of not not giving away our IP. And I don't mean giving it away, because certainly people who contribute, intellectually to the portfolio should have some ownership of it. But with what we've built so far, we actually had a really wonderful relationship with your very own CSU, because we had a molecule we wanted to test as basically a molecule that could prevent virus binding to cells. And it was great, because they said, well, we own this model. And I said, well, we own this molecule. And if the molecule did what it was supposed to do, we own that. And we didn't own anything in the model. And that worked great. And we were really fortunate that Ray hooked us up with those folks, and we did those studies. But there are, if you look at the history is littered with battles between the big companies and the big institutions on who owns what, and at what point in time did they, was that invention made or put into the patents. We're not big enough to handle a lawsuit like that, so we just kind of try and stay clear. If we can't get it in writing that we own it, we've at this point gone with contract service organizations whenever possible.
So thinking of that and going back to internships, I think there are a couple of students who are on this webinar right now, and in building their capacity and understanding of what it means to work in the industry, and that idea of what it means also to own intellectual property, or at a university level, often depending on who is paying for the research depends on who owns the ideas that come out of that research. At a company level, the company always owns the work that you do, that you do for the company. How is developing that understanding and sort of that business acumen, I guess you might say? Have you seen students who come in and do internships go out and end up going back to academia or going into industry, or do you end up hiring some of them, or what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, we're pretty small and we do targeted hiring, so we haven't actually done internships sort of that would go into the hire, and they're usually undergrads are going to go off and go and get their PhD. So we haven't, except for one. My chief business officer did research with me at Harvey Med 20 years ago, and she's fantastic. Little did I know that we would get her back. But I think it's sort of two things, sort of separating out ownership versus inventorship. And I think people need to know, if they're inventors, that they are the inventors on the patents. That's their idea. Even though the company has the ownership, if we can provide them with ownership of the company, then in a sense they own that application, and everybody else's as well. So in a small company where you're, say, cash poor and stock rich, the ability to compensate people for their intellectual contributions by giving them ownership of the company ultimately means that they own the IP that they've generated. So that's how we try and do it.
I'm thinking.
I'm not sure if I got to what you were asking, but that's
okay.
That's what I'm given.
I'm thinking we've covered quite a few of the questions that we talked about last week. Some others that we didn't talk about. Maybe what's one of the biggest things that you have learned throughout this journey that you would share with either a postdoc looking for their next job, whether they're considering trying to get into academia, and we know those spots are very limited, versus going into industry positions, and maybe also your biggest piece of advice for faculty thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation, like what you have done.
Yeah. So to the first one, I think the most successful people we've hired are people who really buy into the fact that this is their company, and they are so motivated to come up with their own ideas and to drive. They basically end up building their own pathway to moving up in the company, because they're part of it. And so it's not that they're waiting for someone to tell them what to do, or they have a series of steps. I need to do this paper so I can do this thing so I can get my PhD. You really have to be the kind of, I hate to use the word because it's overused, self-motivated, but you've got to look to the future and see what it is that you would like to do. What would you like to be? And how do those things you do get you there? And you have the opportunity to do that in a company, to really build your own path. You can find funding opportunities, whether you have to write it or whether someone else does that. Come up with ideas on how you would solve this reproducibility problem. How can you build something that's bigger than the position you are now? And it's been really fun mentoring and learning from the people who do that, because their ideas just keep coming and the company just keeps getting better and better and better. So for those who would like to go in industry, I think this is a great place to put your really creative thinking and vision at work. That's how I ended up here. Is like it just kept getting more and more interesting. Everything that we did opened up more doors, and then we could open up more doors, and we could hire more people, and we could open up more doors. And so I think anyone who wants to go in industry should keep that in mind. And then for academics, I stumbled on this. I had no intent of ever going to the dark side or the bright side, depending on how you want to look at it. But every single day has brought something new. Not always good. A lot of investors who you're trying to calm down if things don't go the way you want, or beg. My children call me a professional beggar because that's what I am. But I think it's really making that commitment to making it work and giving up the things that, me personally, giving up the things that I don't know how to do to people who know how to do them better, right? I am not a manufacturing person. I am not a quality control person, but I recognize the value of those things, and we get fantastic people who can do that. So recognizing what you like to do and what you're good at, and hiring a bunch of people to do the stuff that you're not, but always being the cheerleader. And this is a discussion I have with my husband all the time, because things can get hard in a small company, and you have people who are toiling every day to get things done. And there's got to be someone up there who is making that vision every day. Whether you go home and beat your head against a rock because you're so frustrated that nothing's happening, you go back in there and you show people what we're trying to get to. And there may be a long way to get there, but being an entrepreneur, particularly in a small company, is 90% being a cheerleader. That's a lesson.
So how did you do that? And I know it's going to seem like I'm asking you the same question, but
I'm not answering it right.
Right? So it is when you feel like you're an expert and you feel like you have developed something and it is your child, how did you figure out how to let go of that control to be able to hand and believe that if you're handing off control of this aspect of your baby, of your company, of your grand idea to someone else because they have better skills? How did you tackle building that realization and that trust, finding the right person that you felt you could trust in your team?
So it was primarily by bludgeoning to the head that I came to that realization. Coming from academia, I had these visions of what it meant to develop a product. And it was based on my experience in the lab of doing something, and you get to it, it works. And I have a slide in one of the talks I give, and you might remember this, Sarah. You have this vision of your product. It's a huge, beautiful bouquet of red roses, and it's all perfect. And everything does just exactly what you want. And every step of the process takes a few more roses and throws them out, and it plucks a few petals off the other things, because you have to make a choice. Okay, I'm going to move this product forward. And that means I can't do all of these other things that I was going to do. So that those rose petals get thrown out. And now I'm going to put in a manufacturing process, which means I'm going to throw out 16 of my 24 roses because now I'm only locked in on one process. And each of those steps, when you give up that control, you're giving that control to somebody else. who has to manage that. And like I said, it was through bludgeoning and actually doing it and going, oh my God, I have to give this up. And in the end, you have that one beautiful rose that you're holding, and it's your product. And you've done everything you can to make that be the best thing you've got. And you have all of these people around it who made that happen. And that includes the FDA, and that includes the regulatory people, and that includes your clinical partners and your patient advocates and all of those people. But the word you said, which is the most important here, is trust. Because I'm just a CEO, right? I don't really do anything. I'm a cheerleader and I bring in money and I provide vision, right? But there's everybody else in the company who's doing all of these things. And unless you want to be a micromanager and look at them every day, or what they're doing every single day, you have to trust them. And sometimes there's one or two bad eggs in there and you say, thank you very much for your time. I think you'd be suited to go better to work somewhere else. But for the most part, if everybody believes in where you're going, you trust them, they're smart people, they will be the ones that get you there.
That is exceptionally well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I don't have to ask that question again. So
I'll run out of analogies if you do. So
what is your favorite thing about being an entrepreneur? I am curious. I'm into the sort of the general, more pleasant, fluffy questions.
Yeah. Okay. Of the more fluffiness, my favorite thing. Okay, this is going to sound really, really weird, but it's when you dig into all of the literature and clinical work and regulatory work around the thing that you're really most passionate about. And you spend days and days and months and talking to everybody, and you get that one little glimmer of how this is actually going to get to a patient. And our Synogen doesn't actually take things to patients. We don't commercialize things. We're an innovation company, and we take our ideas and we take them either to 510(k) clearance, send them off to be commercialized, or we take them through opening an investigational new drug application. So we get to phase 1, then we partner it out. So we don't ever actually take things to the patient, but when you get to that point where enough of the stars align that when you tell that story and you believe that story and everybody else says, oh my gosh, you could do that? We can actually start thinking about treating the thick mucus and the bacteria simultaneously in a sea of patient's lungs. Wow. That's the point. I mean, but it's fun. As I said, the hard part is getting there. It's actually the getting there, which I think is really fun because the pieces just start coming together.
That makes me think a little bit, the way you said that, and the fact that you're not actually a commercialization company, which is something that in tech transfer, we are not a commercialization company either, and neither is the university. The university is a research endeavor in many ways, and you and the tech transfer offices are really targeted with identifying if there's research going on that can be licensable. And the idea is to license it out to somebody who would commercialize it, right? Take it further and take it into that next step. And so in some ways, for everybody who's in the audience, your academic labs can function a little bit like Dr. Baker's companies, other than the university might actually own the intellectual property. But that also does not mean that the university invented it. As Shenda very clearly pointed out, inventorship is not ownership. So they are very different things, but it's a remarkable construct. Shenda, how do you find people that want to commercialize your potential products?
Yeah, so I'm going to rewind just a little bit because there's one step that I think we haven't really hammered on hard enough, and that is there's the invention and the idea and that thing that we can license. And then there's commercialization. And there are many years on lots and lots of hard work to go from here to there. So when the university is out licensing something, they are often finding people who are doing both, who are really good at this transitional, sometimes the valley of death, because it's not very sexy to be paying for non-clinical work. Let's do toxicology studies. Let's see if we can make this process as robust as possible. Not super sexy, not, you know, what people think is the most exciting thing. It's actually really, really interesting, but it is the big gap in between having something to sell and a really good idea. And that's probably the biggest, and I would venture to say one of the harder gaps. Selling something is really hard too, but it's a big gap. And then you ask me, oh, how do we find commercialization partners? That's where having fantastic business development people who are connected in the world, in your specific world. I mean, if I'm in the GI space, having a pulmonary development person doesn't help me at all. And these spaces are very sort of well-defined for a medical device company. If you're a medical device company in wound care versus in oral care, which is something that we're learning the hard way because we do all of these things, right? So how do we find the various groups who want to commercialize these things? So it's really finding, again, through your partnerships and your relationships, finding those people who are good at commercialization, or finding the people, which is the bigger version. How do you find the people who are going to do it? And there's really two approaches. There's the companies, the big companies who do partnering, and then there's the investors who will be taking your stuff and finding the, you know, investing in it to find the partners. So
is there any place that you think of as being more successful or less successful? I can just think about the fact that I know from a tech transfer perspective, we'll go to regional conferences, we'll go to national conferences, we'll look at the industry that's showing up and interested, right, in the research that's being presented. From an R&D company perspective, where have you found your greatest success? Is it you being on boards and or panels, or partnering with the NIH or DoD, or how do you find your place that gets you more secure next steps?
Yeah. So again, a couple answers to that. NIH and the DoD have been great partners to us, and the NIH in particular, I've been on a couple of advisory groups there, where I can sit in and see how, at the level where all of the information is flowing up through proposals and filtered through all of the academic institutions, it kind of goes up to NIH, who's funding them, and you get just the synthesis of all of the things that people are thinking of, and being able to take that next step. So that has really helped us in thinking about where we want to be to stay sort of, I'd like to say we're ahead of the curve, but I think we're sort of on the curve. And then the other side, where we found sort of the best partners are investor relations firms and PR firms, because those in your particular area, because that's what they do. They go out and they find investors and groups in your field, and they're the biggest clearinghouse. So the JP Morgans and the big investment meetings of the year, they're there, renting 500 hotel rooms for all of their meetings. And so because we're small and we don't have the ability to hire 5 or 10 people to go out and do that for us, we can leverage our funds by working with a group, an investment relations firm, who has their 20 people, and that each of one of those 20 people gives us 10 minutes every month, but has the Rolodex and has the ability to go out and find people. So that for us has been really, really terrific.
So we have about 5 minutes left. We normally end and give people, we normally end it at about 2 till, so that people can run to a facilities break or grab a glass of water before their next meeting, because we are all overscheduled.
Yes, we are, because we can Zoom and we don't have to fly anywhere.
Right, we don't have to fly anywhere and we don't have to walk anywhere. Is there anything left that we have either talked about previously or that you want to go back in and round out or talk about that we maybe haven't covered, or any parting words of advice or thoughtfulness?
I guess I would just go back to that thought of students who are interested in going into industry. Because I was an academic from when I was 5 years old until, what was it, 2014, when I actually left for real, and never envisioned what, this world was like. And I think it's exciting, particularly the small companies. I always tell people who come here that they have to be prepared to, we're going down this path, and then suddenly, no, we're going to go down this path. And we can pivot, which is the great term for small companies. We can do what we need to do to make it work. If we learn something new and that's more valuable than what we're doing now, even though we're doing 5 things that are kind of simultaneously, we tend to accordion, and then we focus, then we accordion, and we focus. So a small company is a very exciting place to be. I think if you want to have a more stable environment, you don't want to, worry about accordioning and changing and, whether that department's going to be bigger or smaller. Then you go with a big company and you push a button and you run your HPLC all day, and then you go home and have a beer. Very satisfying for those who like to do that sort of thing. Wasn't my thing, but I think you can find the right position in any sort of level industry for what you're interested in doing. So there, parting shot.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I am so excited that this is recorded, and eventually it'll be available on the website for any of you who are in the audience and wish to share it out. If you felt like you got some tidbits here and you want to share it with your labs or your friends or your colleagues, please feel free to do so. It will probably within the month also be a podcast. So for those of you who don't want to watch the video, I am one of those people. It will be available as a podcast on the Ask the Expert website. And I would like to give just a very round, thank you to Shenda. And I could not have asked for a better interview. So I appreciate it. And thank you to all of you who came and joined us today. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and it was really a treat talking with you, Sarah.
Excellent. And we do not have an Ask the Expert for December, but we will be back in January. So
wait, there's one question.
Oh, how do you get added to the listserv?
There you go. Good question. I can't answer.
The Ask the Expert. You go to the Ask the Expert website, and I believe Kathy's typing the answer, which is outstanding. It may end up in the chat, or it may end up in my Q&A. She is the keeper of the listserv. So at CCTSI. But I believe you can go to the Ask the Expert webpage, and at the bottom you can ask to be added to the list, and the emails for everything. And Jason, I don't know if you are at CU or CSU, but you can always email me directly, and I can ask to have you put into the list as well. So you are all very welcome. Thank you so much. I'm just waiting for Kathy to finish typing the answer to Jason. Oh, she answered it. Excellent. So she must have answered it directly with Jason. So we are done. Thank you all, and have a happy holidays as we now walk into Thanksgiving and the holiday winter break. So awesome. Thank you, Shenda. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.